the biggest resistance to change is actually fear. And fear sadly drives a lot of we're so forward thinking and we're so
Yeah.
sentient human beings, but we're so almost forward thinking. And there's so much of this shadow of fear that just covers our eyes and makes us not look into the future in a positive light, but in a negative light. And I think that's one of the big resistances to change. Like, how can I possibly behave in this new way? Or how could I possibly do this podcast in front of 50,000 at Wembley Stadium? Right? Like there's that fear element that comes into it. Like
Yeah.
what's happening? What if I get called out, or what if someone spots my mistakes? And actually, fear management is a really important part of high performance in lots of different areas.
Hi, Sunny. Nice to have you join us today. How are you doing?
Yeah. I'm good, Wilson. I'm good. How are you? You okay?
Yeah. I'm good. I'm doing well. It's a bright day in London, so just enjoy the weather as well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to talking.
Great. Same here. So let's start with change management. Oh, first of all, let's start. Who are you? Maybe people should get to know you a bit before we go ahead.
Yeah, so my name's Sani Khan. I'm in my mid 40s now, late 40s I'd say. I'm a dad to two young boys who are 15 and 14 years old, so I spend a lot of time working with them, do a lot of sport with them. I'm a reader, I guess. I do a lot of reading. I try to get through one book a week. I think I mentioned that last time we spoke. So a lot of
Yeah.
my learning comes from that. But also a coach, so I do a lot of stuff in sports outside of work with football and boxing in particular. So I think that melange of someone who reads and very introverted, but someone who's also quite extroverted, does a lot of football
Mhm.
and boxing coaching. So I'm working with a couple of professional as well. So it's yeah, I think a melange of all of those is what I'd probably say I am.
First of all, why do you read so much? Where did that even start from? Did it
Mm.
start as a hobby or just quest for knowledge?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, how honest you want me to be? I think. So when I was originally born in Pakistan. My family's originally from sort of Kashmir, but when I first came over, I guess my parents or me had a bit of an inferiority complex. I think, right,
Mm,
where we just and we. So I was brought up on a very poor council estate in Surrey, in Red Hill in Surrey. So I spent a lot of my youth, maybe 20 years there, and I think I always felt that being from a very poor background, but having gone to a top level school in Reigate, like a real top school, like one of the best in England, in Reigate, I always felt as though I had a lot of catching up to do, actually. So actually, my desire to learn and read probably comes from a bit of an inferiority complex, actually. But now I feel as though having sort of smashed about 1,000 books, like there's no one I can't talk to, and there's no room I can't go into where I'm like, actually, I feel like I can keep up with you intellectually. That's from like the boardroom right down to, anyone that you meet on the streets as well. And I think my sort of background, being brought up on a council
mm.
estate, has really helped me being able to talk to, you know, drunk people or people who are completely at in the dregs of society. And but then also my sort of education means that I can sort of talk to a lot of people as well. So yeah, I think that sort of it's probably an inferiority thing actually, if I'm really honest, Wilson.
Who would have thought that something as probably as negative as inferiority could push someone to
Yeah.
such heights? Really impressive.
Yeah, and now it's maybe it's gone the other way, and really sadly, if I'm really honest, I sometimes feel a little bit superior to people, and I shouldn't. If
Mm.
they if I if so- if someone says, yeah, I don't really read and I don't really like learning, I shouldn't, probably, perhaps I shouldn't admit this, right, on a podcast, but yeah, I just feel like, oh, wait a minute, like, what do you do? Like, do you not want to learn? There's so much, and the more, the old adage, the more you learn that there's more to learn as well. So
Yeah.
the more you know that you don't know. So I've always had this real thirst to sort of learn and acquire knowledge to help me keep up with people. And plus I need it for my job. Like I'm continuously talking to people on topics like psychology, high performance, team building, leadership coaching, leadership concepts. And so I just feel I have to keep up with what's the latest. But I also go back a lot with my reading. So I've read some of the classics, go back 1,000 years, right? Right
Wow.
from Plato's philosophy, all the up to sort of like, psychology and, neuroscience and sports performance, and like I said, leadership as well. So real melange, real mix of reading as well.
Amazing. And talking about what you do,
Mm.
when you came into that workshop and you started doing what you do, I was just intrigued. I said, I
Oh,
have to have
amazing.
this guy on the podcast.
Oh,
So,
thank you. What, so
what?
what I was going to say, I was going to
Yeah,
ask you what, yeah, because that was one question I had for you. What is it
yeah.
that you really liked, that intrigued you? Because that is the effect I want to have on people, clearly. And you need to be, as a presenter, as a facilitator, you want to leave some sort of impact. But what was it about it in particular that you really liked?
I think is your communication style for a
Mm,
start.
mm,
I love the way you try to get all of us involved in it. Sometimes people come and just make presentations, and maybe for different settings that is allowed. But for a workshop, I think it was just remarkable how you were able to get everyone talking. Even though
oh, thank you.
I noticed some people would normally not come out to say something, but
Oh,
they
really?
felt free. Yeah. And then going into the nitty-gritty of the topic, it was just fantastic. But for me, the first thing was the communication style, your
Brilliant.
presentation style as well. I was like, okay, I need to
Oh,
learn
thank you,
from
boss.
him. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, let's talk change management.
Mm.
For some people, they might not be familiar with the concept of what you do generally, from a work perspective. So maybe if you just want to say a thing or two about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite straightforward. I think large companies are continuously going through change. Who was that Greek philosopher? I'm always going back to Greek philosophers. Heraclitus, I think he said, you never step into the same river twice. So change is
Mhm.
continuous, like change is constant. And so my role in terms of change management, to put it very simply, is to manage the people side of change. Like no one likes change. So if you just went up to someone and said, I want you to stop doing these podcasts, Wilson, on a screen behind, in your room in your laptop. I want you to go into Wembley Stadium in the middle, surrounded by 50,000 people, and I want you to do this podcast with Sunny there. Like that's a massive change for you. And so, you probably wouldn't feel too comfortable doing it. And so the change management is really about managing people through a point where they're used to doing things a certain way. Maybe the last 15, 20 years, they've got a certain tool that they've been using, and then you got to then transform their thinking and completely segue into a different way of working. So it's really about managing a change in behaviors, managing a change in mindsets, but also some of the practicalities of how you communicate to people about the change and how you get them to ultimately adopt the change in a sustainable way. Again, I don't want to bore you with all the intricacies of how that happens, and there's lots of modules in change management. And I'm sure you've heard of the Kubler-Ross change curve, which is linked to grief.
Mhm.
Again, you should probably. I don't want to go into. Otherwise, we'll keep getting sidetracked. But you should definitely look up the Kubler-Ross change
Okay.
curve, because it's probably the most standard one, and it's linked to grief and how we manage grief and the change we
Mhm.
go through when something quite sad happens in our lives. And so change is really about taking people through that sort of that what they call a change curve, and how you
Okay.
manage them in that process. And where we work, it's all about large technology implementations and really hand
Mhm.
holding people through that for that transformation. And having worked at PwC and at Deloitte and at Infosys and at Gallup, every big organization has got their own module and their own
Yeah.
methodology for change. But there's some standard ones like the ADKAR module, or there's Chip and Dan Heath's. They've got this concept of the elephant and the rider. And I mean, there's tons of other change certified change courses that you can go into, which give you a methodology, but essentially it's the same thing.
Yeah. And just drawing a parallel from what you're saying, this is also a career transition podcast where people need to change, right?
Mm,
Settle into new jobs, probably
mm,
change industries and all of that.
mm.
Maybe if just one, what do you think from your experience is the biggest resistance to change? Why do people resist change?
Yeah, it's fear. It really is fear, and it's like you're very comfort in a certain way of working. It's like I'll tell you a very strange story. Like I read a book on neuroscience about 6 months ago, and this is really weird, by the way. So for the last 6 months, I've changed the hand that I write with. So I now, and I've done. You probably never met anyone who's ever done that, but I've weirdly started to write with my left hand, and it's and
Oh,
I and it's yeah, and if I need to write fast, I'll go back to my right hand. But even now, as I was preparing for this, I write your name, podcast, and like the date on the top. I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually quite it's quite bad, right? But it's just the writing's got better over the last like literally over the last sort of 4 or 5 months. I've started to get better and better. So there's a bit of a fear, for change, which really impacts people that they're not going to be able to operate at the same level. Like my writing is not as
Mm.
good with my right hand. Obviously, it's better. Sorry, it's better with my
Yeah.
right hand. It's not as good, but I know eventually in the long run it'll get better. And there's a whole concept around myelination. Again, I'm not going to go into details. Like, please do look it up. It's such a fundamental concept around the like the concept of myelin. Have you heard of myelin?
No, I haven't.
Myelin. You should look it up from a sports perspective. It's critical. Look
Yeah.
up myelin. And it's about repetition. So for me, the biggest resistance to change is actually fear. And fear
Mm.
sadly drives a lot of we're so forward thinking and we're so
Yeah.
sentient human beings, but we're so almost forward thinking. And there's so much of this shadow of fear that just covers our eyes and makes us not look into the future in a positive light, but in a negative light. And I think that's one of the big resistances to change. Like, how can I possibly behave in this new way? Or how could I possibly do this podcast in front of 50,000 at Wembley Stadium? Right? Like there's that fear element that comes into it. Like
Yeah.
what's happening? What if I get called out, or what if someone spots my mistakes? And actually, fear management is a really important part of high performance in lots of different areas, especially
Mm.
sports. And if you look at England last night, I don't know if you watched the game,
Yeah.
right? Like, let's talk about, how much of a change England needs to make in the next few games,
I
right?
know.
And let's
I
talk
know.
about how much fear they played or they seem to play with for a large part of the game. And
Mm.
that's why you got magic moments and magic individuals like Jude Bellingham stepping up, and that's why they
Yeah.
paid their millions. So I really knew something was. I just hoped something was going to happen. And you always know with so much talent, it just takes half a second.
Yeah.
Someone who plays football as well. So yeah, fear. To a long answer short, fear is the
Yeah.
biggest
And by the
resistance.
way, what you said about trying to write with your left hand, there's this adage in Nigeria that says you do not teach an elder how to use the left hand when he's older because it will take a lot to switch from the right to the left
Oh
hand.
yeah,
Like,
really
so
interesting.
so you just doing that. It's yeah, I hope to see how this goes later.
Yeah, I'll send you
Um,
my writing like later on as well.
yeah. Okay, let's talk leadership and
Mm.
team as well. So for people to be productive, to be highly efficient, obviously you need the right people around you. How can leaders get the best out of their teams, um, leveraging the strengths and yeah opportunities with their team members? How can they do that?
Yeah, so I've got my Goodreads. I'm on Goodreads, by the way. I don't know if you're on Goodreads. I've got it open in front of me, and I just as soon as you asked me that question, I just remembered a book that I've read not too long ago, and it's called Turn the Ship Around. It's and
Mhm.
have you heard of this book, Wilson? It's called Turn the
On the
Ship
ship
Around
around?
by yeah,
No.
and it's
You're constantly
yeah.
reading. I need to keep up.
Yeah, no, but so to answer your question,
Yeah.
around leadership, this is the one book that I've read recently, and I should have read it a long time ago. It's by a guy called David Marquette, Marquet, and it's slowly become my top five leadership book of all time. And in that he the you can YouTube this guy, and he now does world tours. And again, very long story short, he was a commanding officer in the submarine
Right.
division within America, and he was being trained to run the most successful submarine in sort of naval history. And they got about 50 submarines roughly, and he was gonna manage the best one. And then because he was the best officer, and then at the last minute he was told basically, yes, you're not going to manage the best one, you're going to manage the worst one. And he was like, what? This was 3 months before he was about to start. So he had to completely change his team, completely change his leadership style. And then he turned, and again, long story short, he turned up on the first day, and he realized that all of his officers in the submarine were just blindly, and if you YouTube him, David Marquette, Marquet, it's got a much better summary of what I'm about to say. But basically, he found that his team members were blindly following his tasks and his injunctions and whatever what he was essentially commanding them to do, just blindly. And he realized, oh my God, I'm like in a submarine where people are stupidly and blindly following. So one of the big lessons that that book taught me, and something that I really espouse in my teams and people I work with, is actually um, putting yes, you tend to sort of give information to authority, and this is a phrase that he uses. you send information upwards to your management because you feel comfortable that they should have the information to make the decision. But actually, he says authority should go to where the information is. And what he meant by that is that he didn't know this ship very well, yet he was commanding it. So he said, right, I'm going to give now authority to you down amongst, in the bottom layer, like,
Yeah.
the people who basically operate the submarine. I'm going to give you authority to make some very, very big decisions. And obviously they, some of them they had to run past him, but that was the ethos that he inculcated. And for me, that is one of the most important things about leadership. It's almost about disowning leadership. And I as a dad and as a coach, I know that I've created a good leader, and I'm sure you've heard this before, Wilson. You know when you've created a good leader, when that person that you're leading not only becomes a leader, but also
Yeah.
creates another leader as well. And
Yeah.
and for me, that is one of the biggest messages that I go around talking. It's linked to that book, and actually, leadership is about disowning your authority and giving your authority to where the information is, rather than information to authority. I think that's one of the key points.
Wow. Interesting. And a lot of leaders don't do that. A
No.
lot. Maybe because they don't know. But it's relinquishing your own authority to
Yeah.
probably the people you're leading. I don't know if that's something most people will be comfortable with as
No.
well. Yeah. So how can they start adjusting? Because it will need a mindset shift, definitely.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So that's a really good point, and that I think that links. And we're going to talk about some of the workshops that I do. But one of the workshops that I've run now at Shell is called Transformational Words, and actually how you make change happen. And this is not only my personal theory, but this is backed by linguistic theory, is actually through language and and you've heard of neuro-linguistic programming, right? And that's essentially the ability to program someone neuro-linguistically. So the language you use is literally impacts their brain, which changes their behaviors. And there's a book called Language, Thought and Reality by Sapir and Worf, Worf, Sapir. They're two people. And I read that book about 5 years ago, and the penny just dropped for me. It was like I've been working in change management for like 20 years, and I've not done enough around language specifically. So transformational words, which we didn't have time to go through in the workshop that we ran, is essentially about creating a a new language in a team to create new, never seen before behaviors. And that's what David Marquette essentially did. He essentially created a new language and a new way of thinking, which introduced to people new concepts that they didn't even know about before. And again, this isn't something that I'm just making up. There's lots of linguistic theory on this. So I think it's quite cutting edge. I don't know many organizations. There are some, by the way, but I don't know
yeah.
many that are looking to bring about. You talked about mindset change. Actually, I'd
Yeah.
say before you change someone's mind, you have to change their language. And I think you mentioned earlier that there's this Nigerian saying about teaching someone old
Yeah.
how to use, and actually sayings and the language. I mean,
Yeah.
they really go shifting behaviors. There's probably, if I asked you right now, and I think you said you were Igbo or Menda, I can't remember, you were Yoruba.
I'm from the southern part of Nigeria, like the
Yeah,
Igbo.
the evil side,
Yeah.
yeah. And I bet
Yeah.
if I went up to your parents and I said, or even you, I said, look, can you tell me about your top two or three mantras or sayings that your
Yeah.
parents said to you? I bet you could probably name two that stuck. And they've probably really changed your behavior over time. Again,
Yeah.
long story short, the way that David Marquette did it was to really change the language around it. And he later wrote another book called Leadership is Language, which I loved, by the way, because it's exactly my
Mm.
concept, where he spoke about the importance of the language and the lexicon that a team can create to change its
Okay.
behaviors. So if you went back to your team and created a new language and a new
Language.
lexicon, that would be one of the most powerful things you can do to change the mindset and ultimately the behaviors.
Mm. Wow, that's interesting. For me, I'm just thinking about us having like an internal team language, how that would be like. And the
Mm,
truth is, people can within the team can then relate with some things that others can be beyond just probably helping them. through that mindset shift, they also get the ability to bond, I feel, because if I say
Yeah,
something and my teammates can actually relate with what I'm saying compared to every other, yeah, there's that connection there.
that's a really good point. And I'll give you a
Yeah.
quick 30-second example. And one of the words that I brought to this team that I ran it in is a concept called the 88. And now you know about football, so this is a concept that I created for football clubs. The 88, as in 88, is a number which that acts as a trigger word for players to recognize that for 88 minutes in a 90-minute
Yeah.
game of football, the average player does not touch the ball, is not on the ball. So if you think about Kyle Walker
Oh.
or I don't know, Phil Foden, or I'm trying to think who else, or Stones, let's pick Kyle Walker. Kyle Walker,
Mm,
if you tally the amount of time that he was literally on the ball, it would have come no more than 2 minutes. So what was he doing for the
interesting.
88? And so it's funny that you mentioned about team bonding, and you got it straight away, Wilson. Actually, the language acts as a way to bring the team together and creates this little
Yeah.
inner circle of truth. And when I mentioned this concept, this football concept, to this leader that did this workshop with, she was like, "Wow, Sonny, that's such an important concept." Because what you're saying
Mm,
is, for 88 minutes of a game, the 88 minutes of running actually makes the 2 minutes worthwhile. Jude
so,
Bellingham
yeah.
was not on the ball for more than 90 seconds in total. I challenge you to watch that game again and just sit with a timer.
That is a strong one.
Yeah, I challenge you. Do it. Sit for 90 minutes, watch that game, and just put a stopwatch on how much he was on the ball. He would not have been on the ball for that long at all. And so that, to your point exactly. So I introduced this guy. And she said, "Sonny, we need this in our office because
Yeah.
a lot of our team do 88% of the work, but don't get the 2 minutes of glory. That's given to
Yeah.
someone else." So yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the language can act to bond and unify the team as well.
Mm. Okay, and now let's talk transformational conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is that? For me, it was very helpful, right, with
Oh,
the team
brilliant.
as well. I think we had so much fun. In fact, I've been giving out some TC three and fours and fives.
No, really, already. That's amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
but
Well done.
we're having fun with it, and but like
Good.
I said, it's also helping us work together as a team. And for me, that's the powerful thing. And with that, we are more productive. And yeah, what is that about? And how
Yeah, I
can
mean,
people leverage
well,
it?
yeah,
Yeah.
you know it. For me, it's a Latin phrase I use. It's called sine qua non. TCs is the sine qua non of high performance. Sine qua non in Latin just simply means the thing that absolutely must exist for this to function. So if you need to have high performance, the sine qua non of high performance for me is TCs, is like the ability to have psychological safety where you can have open and honest conversations with each other without fear of recrimination. And if you go back to Project Aristotle, I think I mentioned it on the call, Google's Project Aristotle, where they studied their
Yeah,
top
I
100
did.
teams, they found that the top 100 had 5 traits, and the top trait of the top, of those top 100 traits was this ability to build psychological safety through open and honest exchange of information and feedback and knowledge sharing. So for me, it's absolutely TCs is a way to praise people but also give
Yeah.
them developmental feedback. And as we more comically went through, it's the ability to just have those difficult conversations around bad breath, bad body odor, picking your nose, slurping your food. There's little subtle things that just annoy you about people. It's how do you address that? And often you can't. I've done this presentation so many times, and I always ask people, like, would you have the guts to go up to your colleague and tell them they got bad body odor? And no one puts their hands up. Like, rarely do people put their hands
Is
up,
that
right?
even safe?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like no one's got the guts to do that, right? But the power of TCs is that when you start having those conversations, when you're brave enough to have them, as you know now, Wilson, with other people, it then opens up a corridor of conversation. They can then start to have those conversations back with you, and then you grow and learn. Ultimately, you learn about yourself like more than anyone else. A bit there's again, please look this up later on. But have you heard of Johari's windows?
Yeah, so many things to read up.
Yeah, no. So that's another one, but
Yeah.
it's really important. But Johari's windows is a little quadratic model, very, very
Okay.
simple. It just talks about what you know about yourself. So that right now you probably know something about me that I don't know about me. Like I don't know, like I might There might be some light or something, or I might have something on my collar, or I'm not noticing. But there also might be something about you that I can tell you, but you don't know. And TCs allows you to have those open conversations that make Johari's windows work as well. So yeah, please do look it up. It's a really important concept.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And maybe if there are links to or materials on transformational conversations, I'll share with the audience as
Brilliant,
well. Really
brilliant.
powerful way of communicating and feeling psychologically safe within the team. So thank you
Exactly.
for sharing that. Finally, talking about quadrants, we had this, or you shared this archetype for different team members, right? And how it goes from the boxer to the chess player to the archer and the roller. Yeah, what is that about? And for me, I know the importance because within the team now we understand
Mm,
ourselves better, and
mm.
it's just marvelous. So maybe you can say a thing or two around that. Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, so you're talking about stakeholder synergy now, and
yeah.
yeah, like a really, really interesting concept. Again, it's so important for high performance. So there's four archetypes. There's the chess player, the boxer, the archer, and the rower. And they're both sort of in pairs where they are diametrically opposed to each other. So the chess player is the person who's a very big picture thinker, like operating at 35,000 feet, wants to look at things at a very high level. Now, if they're working with the archer, which is the person that they're diametrically opposed to, so if you're in an office environment, your normal modus operandi is at a certain level, but you're having to work day in, day out with someone who's an archer, who's down in amongst the details. Now, these are all strengths. Now, the archer is someone who just wants to do things perfectly. They need to have a plan. They need to be very astute. So they need to have facts and figures, and they need to know what the details of things are. Can you see how that might create a problem if you've got a chess player, very high
Mhm.
level, working with an archer, very low level? It causes clashes because their ways of operating. They're sparring at two different paces, if I use a
Yeah.
boxing analogy, and those spars aren't very good if you've got two people who spar it. And then the other two, as I mentioned, are the boxer and the rower. Now the boxer is someone who can be a bit, to use the boxing analogy, a little bit aggressive, very direct, say things quite bluntly. They value results over people, typically. Typically, they are diametrically opposed to the rower. Now, the rower is someone who is very friendly. They want to know how your weekend is. They're very high empathy people. They can be introverted and extroverted, but they typically value people over results. Again, can you see how if you've got a boxer and a rower working together in a team without realizing that they got those two archetypes, what type of clash it creates? So they're the four archetypes, and I think a high-performing team operates with individuals across all four quite well balanced. And that's not to say that if you've got a team which is skewed in two of those or three of those, that you won't function. Yeah, you'll function, right? But typically you've got a blend. And I think the very quick story I'll share is when I did this session last week, a couple of weeks ago in the Netherlands. Now it's been 2 weeks, I think. I think the day before I did yours, the session finished at 3 p.m. A lady had a call at 3:30 p.m. and I was down having a coffee downstairs, and she did the stakeholder synergy one, and she goes, oh, and she just grabbed me. She goes, oh, Sonny, you won't believe what happened. I was like, what? She says, oh, I just had a call with someone who I now identify as a boxer. And I was like, yeah, and she goes, well, Sonny, guess what? I just spoke to him in short, sharp bullet points, which as boxers, you need to talk to them to the point, like quite short and sharp. And I spoke to him for the first time using your methodology in really short, sharp language, and the conversation just flowed a lot better. It just worked. And I'm just so grateful
Yeah.
for you having taught me how to adapt my style. And that's the big raison d'etre for Dream Team, where it's about understanding what your typical archetype is.
Yeah.
And you won't just be one of those four. You'll typically go across all four, but you'll have a predisposition to maybe three out of the
Yeah.
four mainly. And so it's about understanding what your archetype, but then very quickly being able to work out who who you're working with in the room, what the other archetypes are, and then
Yeah.
adapting your style to them. And that's what she did really successfully. So I'm going to ask her to put that as a testimonial, and I'll send you the
Yeah, you
slide
need
later
to.
on because it's a perfect example of it. So
Oh, thank you. And yeah, for us, I think we're seeing an impact, yeah, result from that workshop on understanding. For me, it's helping me also communicate. And when I'm in my boxer mode, I now have to watch out for every other person within the team and
yeah,
yeah, and how can we work together? So no, really wonderful. And yeah, thank you.
no, thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you. So how can people reach you? How can they connect with your work if yeah, if they need to contact you?
Yeah, no, if you can use my I'm too old to be on Instagram and all that stuff. So just honestly, just old school, just send me an email. I mean, you can give them my email address, Wilson. Feel free to use my shell one. So yeah, I'm literally I don't go on like I just this is usually just spread word of mouth. But yeah, no, do drop me an email, and if they're interested in sort of running these types of workshops, I'm happy to sort of get into contact with them, or they can contact me through you as well. But yeah, if you just give them my email address, that should be absolutely fine.
All right. And thank you once again for making our time for this.
No
Yeah,
worries.
thank you for sharing a lot of stuff and a lot of things to write for me. I'm glad this is being recorded, so I'll take my time, get a list, and
Yeah,
go
do go
through
through
it.
it. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
especially yeah, like I mentioned those some of those models and some of those books. Definitely the books. I think Turn the Ship Around. I think
Yeah.
is an absolute classic. And yeah, do look up the YouTube video of that because the story I explained, he'll
Yeah.
explain it much better.
All right. So thank you
Cool.
very much and have a wonderful day ahead, a wonderful week ahead, and happy new
All right.
month, by the way.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, it's the second half of the year started, isn't it? So
Yeah, it is
all right,
indeed.
we're in the business end. Cool. All right. Thanks, Wilson. Take care.
Yeah,
All right.
take care.